Okay, photographers, your patience has been rewarded. Last year, we all lusted after the Sony A9, but that camera, not in my snack bracket. And then earlier this year, the A7 III, which got us thinking about how much we could afford, and now the wait has paid off. The Sony A7 III has arrived, surprisingly, with even more new features, and I won't have to increase my credit limit. Want that? But before we order one, let's see what the A7 III can do, how well it does it, and how well it handles. Well, no handles, but a comfortable grip, although it is a little bit tight to the lens. And I'm going to take it out of my hands and put it on the tripod Manfrotto loaned me to try out. This is the Nitrotech N8 video head with a nitrogen piston for better counterbalance and smoother action. The A7 III has a full-frame sensor with 24 megapixels, same as the A9, less than the A7 III, and shooting with the full-frame 24-105 lens, which is not the kit lens, the results are impressive. But by default, JPEG fine. The camera is capable of better, so the first thing I did was to turn on JPEG plus RAW, and set RAW to uncompressed. Sony's RAW compression doesn't have many fans, and set JPEG quality from default fine to extra fine. At least that feels like I'll be getting the quality I'm paying for. With those settings, a 64GB card holds 950 images. Also a quick trip to Rec Media settings to select either simultaneous for backup or sort to record RAW on one, JPEG on the other card. That's a nice pro feature. The A7 III works quickly, getting lots of shots I would ordinarily have missed. They're sharp and clear. The full frame allows me to crop to the composition I want. Then the RAW files offer lots of detail in highlights and shadow that I was able to recover in Lightroom. The design is utilitarian but functional, and it doesn't offer much in the way of weather sealing. On-off and shutter are well positioned and operate nicely. I like the dual control dials, front and back. But I think the EV dial, it's too easily misadjusted and needs a lock button. I like the new focus joystick, although I like touch. This is the easiest way to select a focus point. The control dial has improved in size and operation. It's less skittish. I dislike the left side menu button. It effectively means you can't adjust the menu with your eye in the viewfinder. That makes sense on a DSLR, not on a mirrorless camera. The LCD screen flips up and down with just enough clearance from the quick release plate. The right side door reveals two SD card slots. UHS 2 is supported in one, not two, and this door is the model for what to do. It covers the side, it suits the design, it snaps open with the latch, snaps closed when shut. On the left side is the model of what not to do. 3 hard-to-open covers where the thin plastic retaining cords are awkward and seem destined to break. Oh, they're honestly dreadful. Oh, and unlike the pricier team members, no HDMI cable clamp, but no worries, I use the Tether Tools jerk stopper. Not quite so bad on the bottom, good space between the tripod mount and the battery door, snaps open, but the latch has to be slid to close. It's like different design teams worked on each of the 3 sides. Oh, and this is the new, larger, longer-lasting Z battery. That doubles the SEPA rating to 710 pictures. You'll definitely appreciate that. I worked pretty hard to get it drained in a day. Finish the setup by configuring Bluetooth, turn it on, and then pair with the PlayMemories mobile app. This enables time and location sync with the phone. Now, if you'd like to preview your photo after taking it, turn on Auto Review, it's off by default. Another setting I'm making is to set the focus hold button on the lens to IAF. Press the button and the focus locks onto the subject's eye. I really find this feature transformative. This makes so many photos so much simpler. So I mentioned the battery, the dual card slots, focus joystick. Here's what else is new if you're coming from the A7 II. It's slightly bigger, and it's 650 grams, about 50 grams heavier. And this is a touchscreen, although its only function is to select the focus point. It can't be used to focus, snap, or navigate the menu. While useful, that's very limited compared to the competition. It's off by default, so turn it on, and then select Touch Panel and Pad. It takes a little getting used to, but using the screen as a touchpad to focus on fast-moving subjects in settings where the subject isn't the closest thing to the camera, like these squirrels and chipmunks, really adds flexibility. And this new sensor claims a larger dynamic range. We'll head off to DSC Labs to check that out on a xylochart. The ISO now goes up to 51,200 and then extends to 204,800. Sony has cleaned up their high ISO act. These images are all usable with good detail up to 51.2, and though there is clearly grain and noise at 102.4, even at 204.8, there's only a hint of color shifts and mushiness that used to plague high ISO images. There's a major update to the autofocus system, similar to the A9, 693 focus points up from 117. They nearly cover the entire screen. And the burst is faster, with a larger buffer. Back to that in a minute. Video resolution is increased to 4K, and the picture profile function has more picture profile gamma options. More video later. The non-locking mode dial includes scene, full auto, and the 4 standard exposure modes, as well as 2 memory positions, video and S&Q, a variety of slow and fast video modes. There's no panorama mode, in fact, no panorama function. In program, front and rear dials provide alternate combinations of shutter and aperture. In aperture or shutter priority, both dials adjust the setting. Turn on the exposure set guide for a nice on-screen display. Shutter ranges from 30 seconds in 5-second steps up to 15 seconds, and then up to 1/8000. Bulb is available in manual. Shutter options are enabled using the silent shutter setting. When silent is on, the camera uses the completely silent electronic shutter, but that does not change the availability of higher shutter speeds. When silent is off, the electronic front curtain can be turned off. The double mechanical curtain is clearly audible. In manual, use the front dial for aperture, but menu options can flip that. There's also a setting to reverse the operation of the dials if that's your muscle memory. The meter for manual settings appears at the bottom, but disappears while ISO is adjusted. Why is that? There are 5 meter modes: matrix, now called multi, center weighted, and spot, as well as full screen and highlight. Spot has 2 sizes and is locked to the center of the screen, but the menu can link the focus spot to the meter. Now, when the focus spot moves, so does the meter point. With Auto ISO back on, you can see the changes it's making as the meter mode changes. Incidentally, use Exposure Standard Adjust to override the meter with a preset adjustment. Individual offsets can be created for each meter mode. Press DISP to display other screen display options, which include a histogram, a level, and a viewfinder shooting companion screen. These screens can be customized to select which appear in the carousel, but not which items appear on which screen. In aperture and program modes, when using Auto ISO, the minimum shutter speed can be set. But using fast or faster, a faster shutter speed is prioritized. With slow, slower, a lower ISO is prioritized. So in this scene, the standard aperture priority exposure setting is 1/125, ISO 320. Faster is 1/500, ISO 1250. Slower is 1/40, ISO 100. I like Auto ISO, and this makes it even more powerful. Both photo and video aspect ratios are available, as well as APS-C Super 35. And let me decode that for you. In Auto, the lens determines the setting. A full-frame lens, Sony labels those with FE, provides the full resolution. I've set the 24-105 FE at 70mm and filled the screen with the DSC Cameline chart. Now, when I turn APS to manual with manual off, there's no change. With manual on, the camera crops to APS-C 1.5, and the image that's saved when it's in this mode is 10 megapixels, where the full frame was 24. Let's change lenses to the SEL 16-70 at 70mm. This is a Sony crop lens designed for APS-C cameras. Change the setting to off and you'll see the APS-C vignette, then back to auto for the APS-C crop. When left on auto, the camera auto-switches according to the lens. In manual, you can force a full-frame lens to the crop size and resolution. Hopefully this has talked you out of using crop lenses on this body, for stills anyway. Like other shooting settings, focus mode and area are selected from the Fun menu. Single, continuous, and auto, which switches to continuous when movement is detected. Manual and DMF, which allows autofocus to be adjusted using the lens focus ring while the shutter's half pressed. For area, wide, which selects the closest object from the whole scene. Zone, for a large movable area, use the joystick. Center, a single non-movable spot in the center. 3 sizes of movable spot, lots of screen coverage for these, and expand flexible spot. Same idea, but it will look outside the spot if it can't find a focus object. So, to follow the train, continuous, expand flexible spot at the point where it enters the frame. And even with relatively little light, I'm blown away by these results as the train approaches the camera and I'm bursting at 8 frames per second. From the first image to just about the last, this is better than anything I've seen. And if that feels just a little bit artificial and rehearsed, it works just as well in a real-life situation. I did sometimes find it hard to see the focused area. It would be nice if it changed to a different, brighter hue when it's being moved, but pressing AF on reveals it. The customizable AF on button focuses by default, and the focus action can be removed from the shutter for back focus operation. But note that AF on does not work with manual focus, but it does with DMF, which explains that mode's existence. For super accurate focus, turn on AF in Focus Mag, and then activate the Magnify view. Press AF on, or the shutter for refocus on the expanded view subject. In manual focus, by default, expanded view appears when you turn the lens's focus ring. Use the joystick or touch to move the expanded view, or press to change the magnification. Of course, there is a menu option to turn Auto Expanded View off. If you prefer this and don't want it on every time, use the Custom Key setting to assign a button. I use Custom 1 to Focus Magnifier. Then it's available when you need it. Now, in case you didn't notice on the way in, there are independent custom settings for stills and video. I like to use Expanded View in video also, so I've set Custom 1 for video to follow stills. But customize it to Focus Magnifier in case you change your mind about stills later. Autofocus options abound. AF TrackSense adjusts how quickly the camera reacts when a new object appears on screen. Locked On retains the current subject. Responsive switches to the new subject. With Locked On, I focused on Cala and waited for a cyclist to pass. The focus stays with Cala. And then Responsive. At 8-frame burst, the cyclist is only in 3 frames. It takes 1 frame to switch the focus to the cyclist, and 1 to return to Cala. AF Area Regist captures a specific focus point, and this can be assigned to a custom button for quick recall. I went to High Park to meet up with Arienne, who's been shooting with the A7 II, to take some photos of cherry blossoms, ducks, and chipmunks.
I like that the A7 III has 2 slots for your memory cards. You can easily be recording RAW into one card and JPEG into another. It's something that I don't have on my A7 II. I really like all of the focusing features. While I was shooting the chipmunks, I was using the touchscreen focus so I can easily move. As the chipmunk was moving around, I could move the focus area. Also in video mode, I was shooting with both manual and automatic focus, but I preferred the automatic focus, especially because I could use the touch screen to dictate what area of the screen I wanted in focus, which actually made it easier for me than manually focusing as I would normally do with my A7 II.
The stabilization works very well. I was able to handhold shots down to 1/2 second reliably, and managed to get a reasonable amount of success at 1 second too. The complexity and versatility of the A7 III can mean a lot of adjustments from one type of shooting to another, and I've never had the discipline or inclination to use the custom settings on the dial. But I had an aha moment when I was trying out Reg Cust Shoot Set. While parading about, I typically shoot single shot, aperture priority, single focus, wide. So there's a lot to reset if I want to shoot a burst. I configured custom hold 1 for burst, shutter priority 1/1000, continuous drive, continuous focus, and flexible spot. Then I assigned it to a custom button, like 4, press 4, and the camera resets to the selected settings, release, and it returns. With eye detect set on the lens button, face priority, which is a fallback for eye detect, seems unnecessary. Set face priority in AF turns it on, and the other option displays the face detect frame. Although they should be adjacent, there's also a setting to register faces and prioritize them, but this still has trouble identifying me when I have my glasses on. Take them off, there I am. With exposure and focus set, we can turn our attention to white balance and color. Several white balance presets and 3 slots to save custom settings use set to capture. Set has not been available in video before, it is now. There's an interesting variation on white balance useful in dark interiors. Priority set in auto white balance can be standard, ambience, which favors the amber shift of tungsten light, and white, which favors a true white. Creative Styles provide a selection of presets, including neutral, as well as black and white, and each can be fine-tuned with contrast, color, and sharpness. Now, I often hear from photographers that they prefer the color profile provided by one manufacturer or another. Here's the ability to fine-tune to your preference. I do think that Sony's been listening to the comments about skin tone. They seem to be improved in these in-camera JPEGs. And Sony continues to impress me with their vibrant colors, particularly reds that are often oversaturated with other brands. And picture effects, not compatible with RAW, but an interesting selection of filters and effects. I wish that the effect would save in a JPEG file and the unaffected in RAW, or that these effects could be added in playback mode, but sadly, no. And this is a shorter list of effects than Sony has provided in the past. HDR, watercolor, and illustration, which I liked, are missing. The scene position provides a few presets for specific image types, which may be useful for novices or if you're in a hurry. In my mind, the green auto setting is for novices. This camera doesn't need scenes. Turning to drive, there are 4 burst modes: high, high plus, low, and mid. Before you start, set Cont Shoot Length to Shoot Only Display. That's the progress bar screen left to show you the amount of buffer remaining. Slow appears when the buffer is full. In high, mechanical shutter, shooting full manual, extra fine JPEGs to a freshly formatted UHS 2 card, I clocked 8 images per second for 24 seconds, when the buffer filled and slowed to about 3 per. When you finish shooting, the buffer saving progress appears at the top of the screen. And the buffer takes about 60 seconds to clear, and nearly all settings and the menu are locked out. With High Plus, where you lose the real-time screen refresh, it records 10 per second, and the buffer fills at 17 seconds. The silent electronic shutter is no faster, also recording 10 per second for 17 seconds before slowing. Incidentally, high with mechanical, using continuous focus and exposure, still 8 frames per second. While not as fast as the A9, this is incredibly impressive, both for the speed and the size of the buffer. This camera can really fill up a memory card. Drive modes also include 10, 5, and 2-second timers for a single shot, then combinations of the same with 3 and 5 images. Why can't these be combined? Exposure bracket in both continuous and single versions from 0.3 with 3 images up to 1 stop with 9 images, then 2 and 3 stops with 3 and 5 images. And white balance and DRO brackets with low and high settings. These save multiple images from a single snap. Now I have to turn off RAW to use it, but DRO Auto HDR offers some interesting capabilities to extend the dynamic range. Using the HDR setting, a range of up to 6 stops can be captured. The camera snaps 3 exposures and combines them into a single image. It's essentially an exposure bracket with in-camera processing. The A7 III does not have a native intervalometer for time-lapse, and the 3 does not support downloadable apps, which provided that function in the past. But with the dial on S&Q, and the S&Q set to 30p in 1 frame per second, I got a reasonable approximation. For video, anyway. You can shoot video from any mode, but I prefer the video position. That adjusts the aspect and crop. Otherwise, that changes at the second you press the red button. And it also adds the audio meter display and updates the menu settings to conform to functions available in video. Now, I've never liked the red button, and Sony now lets me customize the shutter button to stop and start video while you're in video mode, and then to disable the red button. Thank you. This is 4K, the 16:9 UHD version, no 17:9 Cinema 4K. I think the quality is exceptional. And I don't usually think much of in-camera stabilization for video, but the combination of lens and body works well here, even at 105mm, particularly considering that it's a full-frame sensor. It doesn't mean you won't need a gimbal or tripod, but it does allow more handhold shooting than I expected. In 4K, data rates go up to 100 megabits. UHS-2 is capable of higher. Just saying. HD frame rates range from 24 to 120, with a max of 50 megabits except for 120, which is 100. All formats use the full width of the sensor downsampled. The 4K 30 frame has a slight crop. 120 frame recordings, when played back at 30 frames, can provide 1/4 slow motion with audio. Slowed to this speed, the effective data rate would be 25. And then there's the S&Q mode, a variety of recording settings labeled as the frame rate, which record from 1 to 120 frames per second. The record setting, which is the playback rate, 30, 60, and 24, then govern if the playback is slow or fast. The screen indicates the amount, which goes from 5 times slow when 120 is played at 24 to 60 times fast when 1 frame is played at 60. And note that the data rate changes. All of the 60 frame are 50 megabits, 120 played at 24 is 12 megabits. Also note recording length is dependent on the playback length. That setting, 5 times slow, will only record for 6 minutes. There are 3 panels of video-specific features, which include the ability to save a proxy recording, a low-res version for social media posting or to speed up editing. The proxy files are recorded at 720 resolution with a data rate under 10 megabits and stored in a separate folder called Sub. They're not available for AVC HD or 120 frame recording. And oddly, in 4K mode, an external monitor blacks out when recording starts if proxy is on. The powerhouse feature here is Picture Profiles, a selection of presets to adjust the sensor's output for dynamic range and color. Inside the presets are enough settings that can be adjusted and tweaked to gladden the heart of any video technician. For you and I, however, it's a little overwhelming. That said, it may be worthwhile to make some adjustments. The highlight setting here are the gamma curves, including S-Log 2 and 3, which extend the dynamic range beyond the standard 8 stops our current display devices support into the new world of HDR, high dynamic range. Now I've come to DSC Labs in Toronto to measure the dynamic range of the A7 III using their Xyla chart. Now this chart can demonstrate 25 stops of dynamic range, and going from this side to that side, each rectangle is 1 stop less light. I've set the exposure so that the brightest rectangle is exposed at 100%. I'm using Zebra and the waveform monitor on a Shogun recorder to measure that. With picture profiles off, 8, maybe 9 rectangles are visible. 9 visible means 8 stops of range. I'm counting on the superimposed waveform on the right. Now, there are some minor variations in response as we go through 1 to 6. However, when we get to preset 7, which uses the S-Log2 gamma setting, the left square dips to about 60%. So I'm opening the aperture from f16 to 6.3 to return it to 100%, which reveals about 11 rectangles. What you don't see, as I'm using an ISO of 800, is that S-Log2 forces the ISO to a minimum of 800. Changing to 8, the left square drops below 80%. Now with f4, 13 rectangles are visible above the noisier black level. Preset 10 with hybrid log gamma is a special case. We're adjusting the aperture down to f7.1 and 14 rectangles are visible. However, HLG is meant to be aware of the dynamic range of the display device, so adjusts accordingly. That means that while the leftmost rectangles may appear the same, a display that supports HLG will show them up as distinct and different. Now, if you're using picture profiles, the Gamma Disp Assist should be set to auto to help you see what you're doing. And then, while some of these settings provide usable in-camera footage, others require post-production color grading. And before you step into this, make sure you test the settings you plan to use and the adjustments you'll need to make in post. These low data rate 8-bit recordings limit your ability to color grade or adjust your footage. This is not RAW. Now, by the light of a single candle, we're starting with the ISO at 102,400. We're going to turn it down all the way to 12,800. It does start off slightly noisy, but the video quality is quite good by the time we get to the end. We are shooting in shutter priority with 1/60th shutter, and the aperture is going to be pretty much wide open at f4 for most of the scene. In HD, I can show you all of my screen settings, but I'm going to switch to 4K because I believe the quality there is even better than what we're seeing. Now that we've switched to 4K, it's cropped in slightly because we're at 30 frames 100. It's also lost face detection, which doesn't work in 4K, but it wasn't particularly detecting my face anyway. We are still in autofocus continuous. This is a custom white balance. We captured about 2500 Kelvin, and I'm using picture profiles here, picture profile 1 with Cine 1. The only adjustment I've made there is to turn the detail down to -4. In HD, the bendy rolling shutter effect is barely noticeable. It's more pronounced when shooting in 4K, but this is a demo. In real-world shooting, you won't often run into this. Now, I didn't get to do a lot of shooting in the short time I had the camera to review, and I wasn't able to generate an overheating warning. However, there is a setting to delay the overheating shutdown. One thing worth noting, if you're recording on 2 cards, file numbering won't necessarily be the same. Video shooters prefer Zebra for setting exposure, settings from 70 to 100 plus and 2 custom configurations. Video shooters prefer peaking for focus. Again, multiple options to set it up. And there are markers, center, a selection of aspect ratios, safe area, and grid. And there's extensive support for HDMI. Much of this has been around for a while, although this screen still has some odd behaviors. There's no HDMI info display in 4K, and in general, all stills and video settings output 1080 at 60 frames, regardless of the resolution and frame rate setting. The 2460 switch works only in 4K 24 frame mode when the HDMI resolution is set to 2160 1080. If you want 24 frame output, use the 4K output select. In addition to transferring files from the camera to a smartphone, both video and stills can be recorded using the PlayMemories app, which has a limited set of features. And we're all used to the little video quirks like file numbering starts at 1 each time the card is formatted. And in playback, Sony does not offer a RAW to JPEG conversion. But a feature I've long requested, the ability to see the actual file name, has been added. Thank you. The system is not as responsive as I'd like. Sometimes I think it hasn't caught a key press like menu. I pressed again only to see it hop in and out of the menu screen. That took a little getting used to. Both the A7 III and the A9 offer more, like the R3's 42 megapixel resolution or the A9's 20 frame burst. But the focus engine here is an improvement over the R3, and the A9 does not offer picture profiles, making this a more desirable camera overall. I'll let Arienne sum up.
To be perfectly honest, this is so comparable to the A7 II for a much cheaper price.
In addition to the long battery life, the camera can be charged and powered from USB as long as there's some charge in the internal battery. The A7 III is a complex camera, and Sony's menu system adds unnecessarily to that complexity with a lack of organization. After a week or two, you'll have learned about the functions and can organize the custom settings, both the buttons and my menu, which will reduce the frustration. I've ranted about this before. There's lots of room for improvement. There are 2 memory positions. You can customize the keys for stills, video, and playback, and the function menu can be reorganized to your taste. Now this is most assuredly a great camera, and although I've uncovered lots of issues, I'm still impressed and whelmed. Maybe even a little overwhelmed. I haven't made my decision yet, but don't be surprised if I bring one home soon. Compared to other Sony models and the competition, it's a bargain. One factor to consider though, Sony's full-frame lenses are pricey. Good, but pricey. Hope this helps. If not, I'll do my best with relevant questions and civil comments. Post them below. Shoot until your memory card is full and your battery is empty. And please do what makes YouTube creators happy. Subscribe. Hey, thanks!